Pedro from A&P-REACTS. I'm here with Aaron from My Dying Bride. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, I'm happy that that you're here with me today. I'm happy that you took the time. So I want to say thank you for you taking some time to chat about the latest album.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
And so I can pick your brain a little bit about some of the songs, some of the tracks, and a little bit of how the album came about. But first off, how are you doing? How's everything with the family, with everybody, considering everything, all the craziness that's going around in the world today?
Yeah, we're doing okay at the moment, actually. We are quite well locked down here because my daughter lost her spleen to cancer when she was 6, and she's a little bit more susceptible to catching anything. So we have to really make sure that we don't go, well, we don't go anywhere. So we have friends and family who bring us our shopping, and I go on a walk every 2 days just for the exercise. The weather here is beautiful at the moment, so that's fine. And you know, you steer clear of people. When you see people coming down the other side of the pavement, everybody's in the road, and it's just it's a bit more strategic when you go for a walk now. You can't just walk past people. You've got to head out into the road. So we're in lockdown. We're on week 4, and we are expecting to be in lockdown for 12 weeks. So it's not that bad because the schools are closed. So I'm teaching my daughter every day. So time passes very easily because we're doing math and English and science and geography, art and physical education, messing around. So I don't actually have time to get bored. And I certainly don't have time to get creative either. You know, when she used to go to school, I would have plenty of hours in the day to maybe do some writing or some recording or do something creative. At the moment, when I put her to bed, I'm in bed half an hour later. I am tired, man. It's tiring looking after kids 24/7. So at the moment, no time to get bored, and not that bothered about the lockdown either. You know, when we were going through the whole cancer thing, we made a lot of new friends, and one of our friends is still in hospital, and they have been in hospital for over 100 consecutive days. So when you consider people are in lockdown and they can sit on their TV and watch Netflix and order food and go out for a bit, these people can't go anywhere. So I consider myself to be very lucky, and it really angers me sometimes when people say how bored and frustrated they are when they really don't know what it's like.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we still have our health. And I think sometimes people take that for granted until you don't have it anymore. And then you realize how everything else becomes so small when that piece of the puzzle is not present anymore.
Oh, yeah, without your health, and again, it's not just your health, it's the health of those nearest and dearest to you. Because when somebody of your blood is suffering, you feel it. You really feel it. When you love someone so much and they are in a lot of pain, you feel that because the blood is running through both of your veins. So it's okay looking after yourself. That's important. You've got to look after others as well.
Yeah, I hear you. Being a father as well, and my son has asthma, and he had it really badly when he was a baby. It was not until he was 2 years old that he was diagnosed with asthma. So for the first 2 years, we were in and out of the hospital, not knowing exactly what the problem was.
Yeah.
You almost wish that you could transfer whatever illness they have into you, so that you can take away their pain, and then you can deal with it on your own. But not being able to help them, it's a lot more painful than having the illness yourself.
Oh God, yes. Suffering children it's just, it petrifies me.
Yeah, it is something scary. Moving on perhaps to something a little bit more lighthearted. Let's talk about the new album, The Ghost of Orion. It was a long time since Feel the Misery came out. At any point in time, did you have doubts about the new album coming out and in what shape that album would be?
No, I knew the album was going to come out. Whether or not I was going to be on it was a different story. Because I took so long a break from My Dying Bride. that when I returned, I couldn't reconnect properly. I felt so distanced from all of the guys. I was aware they were recording the album while I was in the hospital, and Andrew would email me clips of some of the riffs, and I wouldn't even listen to them because my focus was so much on my daughter. Everything else felt trivial. Even creating music, something I'd done for 25 years, it just felt insignificant compared to what I was going up against. And so I didn't bother listening to some of the music, and they continued to write the album, and I knew it was progressing. And then as my daughter started to get better, I realized, okay, my focus can start to return to My Dying Bride. And the album was almost fully recorded by the time I joined in the fun. And going into the studio, though, I thought I could get away with just doing the same vocals I'd done on the other 12 or 13 albums. But Andrew, the main songwriter, he really upped his game on this album. And when I went into the studio and thought, I can sing any old shit, it'll be fine. And it wasn't like that at all. I realized I need to be bringing my A game to the table here, because if I try to do my old style approach, it will be lackluster and people will see through it immediately as something that simply isn't worthy. He's just not trying hard enough. So the studio engineer, Mark Minot, and Andrew really cracked the whip a bit. And it's strange, you know, when you've been doing something for such a long time and someone comes along and says, you're not doing it right, do it better. You kind of think, well, really? You're telling me to do it better? Look at my back catalogue. Look at my history. I can do this shit. But they were right. They were right. And so I tried different approaches to the vocals and different vocal aids. And it was a long and painful process. The vocals took about a year to record, on and off. And there were times when I was getting so frustrated, I would just have a rock and roll moment and storm out, and then not return for 2 weeks, because again, I just thought, maybe I'm not connecting with My Dying Bride yet. Maybe I've still got to find that solid bond that we used to have. And if I can't re-establish that bond, then there are options here. A, the album will be an instrumental album because I won't be on it. B, we get a new singer for this album. Or D, see, they just keep hanging on and waiting till I'm ready. And it was a sort of a combination of, well, it wasn't not the first one, because I did think it might have to be an instrumental album. Because when you try a vocal and you've been singing the same line for 3 hours and it's still not right, you just think, I've lost the plot. Yeah. I can no longer do this job. I need to move out and let someone else do it. But thankfully, with encouragement from Andrew and Mark and some new experimentations, I finally nailed it. And when the recording was over, there was no champagne, there was no high fives, there was no celebration. I just was so relieved it was over. I left the studio and I didn't bother listening to any of the mixing. I didn't bother going down to any of that stuff, because I'd almost hated the album because it was a tortuous affair. Being drip fed tiny bits of the same song over and over and over again drove me against my own music. And you won't believe this, but I mentioned it before, I still have not heard the CD, because I don't think I'm ready to listen to it, because it was such an arduous journey to create that I fear that when I do listen to it, it will bring back those painful moments and I'll throw it through the fucking window. So I'm just not ready to listen to the album. We've rehearsed 2 songs for when we play live. So I'm obviously up to scratch with Your Broken Shore and To Outlive the Gods. We managed to rehearse those two songs. So I had to listen to those, which is fine. But I haven't listened to the whole CD yet. I haven't plucked up the courage to play the thing. But I know I'll warm to it one day. I'm just not sure when.
Will this change the way you view, or at least the way you approach recording of future albums? Because it seems like it was a very painful and arduous, long experience, to the point where you haven't even heard the final recording. So is this going to have a lasting impact on how you approach future recordings?
I don't think so. I think the problem with this album, there were many hurdles set before us to get over, and it was really difficult. Obviously, the issue with my daughter was the main one, and then one of the founding members, Calvin, he returned for a stint, and Calvin left at the beginning of the writing of this album. We're not entirely sure why, but it is what it is. So that actually allowed Andrew, the other guitar player, to write all the guitars, which I'm sure, you know, other bands who have two guitar players, I'm sure if one of them wrote all the guitars, he'd love that. So Andrew went to town. You know, he could play whatever he liked, and he really did. And he tells me that there are parts on the album where there's 11 guitars all performing at the same time, and it's like, wow, it's like an orchestra. So when Calvin left, Andrew thought, I'm not going to get a new guy in, teach him all the new songs and put him through the studio. I'll just do it all myself. So he did, and he did a fantastic job. Unfortunately, our drummer, Sean Taylor Steels, he left on the eve of the recording. That was a little bit of a problem. However, Mark Minot, the studio engineer, he knew Jeff Singer from Paradise Lost, ex-Paradise Lost. And he said, don't panic, guys. I'll give Jeff a ring. Still come to the studio, everybody, and we'll see what happens. Jeff's kit was already in Mark's studio because Jeff was doing some session work. So we went into the studio thinking this is not going to work. We met Jeff for the first time. I'm surprised we didn't meet Jeff in the past when My Dying Bride and Paradise Lost played together. But we'd never met Jeff before. He's a lovely guy. We played the music to him, and he recorded the whole album in 10 days. So it was fabulous.
Wow.
But so there were obstacles that we had to get over to create this album, which makes this album seem more extreme. And we're hoping that when the next album is due to be recorded, life will be sweet and easy, and we'll breeze into the studio, we'll enjoy the process of creating another record, and we'll all high-five and have champagne when it's recorded, and I'll listen to the CD when we get a copy. This one had extreme hurdles put in front of us, which we've never experienced before. Hopefully, we never will again.
But maybe those hurdles gave a little bit of texture, gave a little bit of soul to the way this album sounds. Because to me, the album came across as a journey. And the question that I have for you is, do you feel like this record perhaps not necessarily being your own personal journey because you came in at the tailor end, but do you feel like this is a journey that represents the band where they were 5 years ago, where they are now with all these changes, all these hurdles that you had to go through?
Yeah, definitely, because the things that make you who you are will be reflected in the things you create. You can't just go through life pretending life hasn't happened to you. It has, and you portray that in your art form, ours being the music that we do. And now I could have filled the whole of The Ghost of Orion with lyrics about the turmoil and the time I spent in hospital with my daughter, but had I done such a thing, I would have hated the album even more, because it would be so awful for me to listen to, because it would remind me of all those times, and I don't want that. I don't mind talking about it because it helps ease the pain, I suppose, but I couldn't write every song about it. It would be a nightmare album, and I'd never want to sing any of the songs live. But I had to write something because it's an experience, and your albums, or at least our albums, they should reflect some of your own personality. That's why we don't write proper rock and roll songs, because none of us are rock and roll. We write long, drawn out, angst-ridden songs because that's how we've lived some of our lives. And if you can share a bit of it, it eases the burden. And so that's what we do. So the album has evolved from Feel the Misery in the same way we've evolved. We've put our experiences in to the Ghost of Orion, and it is part of us now. All our albums are part of us. Each album is an expression of the years we've spent prior to that. So it's difficult to imagine what our next album is going to be like because we haven't lived it yet.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned earlier about how difficult it was for you to lay down the vocals the way you guys wanted to sound. Because when I was listening to the album, one of the things that immediately came at me was how good, how outstanding the vocals were on this record. They were dynamic when they needed to be. They were powerful when they needed to be. And now listening to you talk about how difficult that process is, it almost makes it seem like the two don't go together, because such a difficult process ended up creating such a magnificent record from a vocal perspective. I mean, perhaps one of the best, in my opinion, from a vocal standpoint. It was just, there was so much emotion, there was so much anger, and I guess maybe that came from the process itself, but there was so much anger into the vocal performance. I was just blown away.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. But I still don't want to do an album like that again. I know it came out, it was worth the hard work, you know, but albums have been amazing to record in the past. And in the very early days, most of the band were together in the studio because the technology didn't quite allow the individual approach that we can experience today. Today, you can record, God, I can record anything at home and send it to the studio, and they can master it to sound like it was, you know, done in a huge studio. And there's a camaraderie you feel with your bandmates when you're in a studio together. You're watching through the glass one of your friends performing and recording on this album, and there's a strong bond there. And on this album, there was nobody in the studio. Everything was already done, and even the people who went in to record their parts, they did it on their own with Mark, the engineer. There was no fun and games. There's a great studio we used to use in Manchester called Futureworks, and on the floor above the recording studio was like Xboxes, PlayStations, PCs, and gaming chairs. And you know, we would think of any excuse to not bother recording for now, put it off for an hour, and go upstairs and play on these games and stuff. And it was great, and it was wonderful. And when you're in a studio like that, the whole band are there, funnily enough, and some hanger-oners as well, and it's great. But times have changed, you know, and I think because of the circumstances of the recent years, I didn't want anybody else in the studio. I didn't say that, but everybody kind of worked it out for themselves. They're not stupid. So I kind of made a rod for my own back, I suppose. But it worked out. You know, it was hard, and it worked out. But I'm just hoping and praying that the future, we won't have so many turmoils in our lives, and the recording, just fingers crossed, the recording will go a lot smoother, and we'll feel like our old selves again. This album felt quite distant to me, and as I mentioned, I'm not fully connected with it yet. I'm sure that feeling will come back in the future. I just need time.
Yeah. And speaking of time and how time heals, Tired of Tears is for sure one of the most personal tracks on the album for yourself.
Yeah.
You find that song to be therapeutical in terms of helping you cope with what you went through and helping you deal with what you went through?
When I wrote the lyrics, yes, because it was just a blank piece of paper, me and silence, and I wrote my thoughts and how I felt. And when I wrote the words, I then played the song and I massaged the words to fit the song appropriately. And that was good, and that felt good. That felt like an exorcism, if you like, a process where I could vent my darkness, I suppose. But as I say, because the studio was so terrifying and so terrible, when I went in there, I thought I'm going to struggle recording this song because of its emotional content. But again, because I had to try different vocal styles to really make it work, the passion was ebbing out of the window as the frustration was coming in through the door. And I kind of lost the plot a little bit with that song, not on an emotional level, but I was just fucking angry because it wasn't coming together like I really wanted it to come together. But again, it was hard work. It was an interesting process. It's complete now, and I've not heard the final song.
What? You haven't?
No, because I don't want to. You know, there are things. There are a couple of songs in My Dying Bride's entire history that I've only heard when I captured my voice in the studio, and then I've left them and never returned. And this is going to be one of them. I don't need to. You know, it might sound a bit weird. I don't need to return to it. I've done it, and we won't play that song live. And I'm, you know, fans will be disappointed to hear that now. But sorry, that's not going to happen. And again, the record label said we want to do a lyric video for this song.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that? And I said, it's fine. I'm not going to see it. So, you know, so long as it's sensitive to the lyrics that are there, and you know the provenance of the song, go to town, do what you like. But I won't know what it looks or sounds like.
How is the, speaking of music videos, how was the process behind Your Broken Shore with the video?
Well, I've known the
you looked like you were down in the dirt in that video.
Well, that's just the angle of the camera, because that was a very fast flowing river not far from where we live. But because it was November, the river's full of leaves because it's autumn, and it was really cold as well. The guy, James Sharrock, the director, he's an Australian guy and he loves all his surfing and stuff. And he brought me up this dry suit and said, put that on, you won't feel the river at all. It's thick and you keep your clothes on, just get into it, zip it up, and it's amazing. So I did that, and there's a huge zip that goes all the way across your chest, and it's massive, and you feel secure when you've got this thing on. So I climbed into the river. Nobody told me there was a zip at the back, which I hadn't zipped up. As soon as I got into the river, the suit immediately filled up with ice cold water. And it was just terrifying. I was told him, it's freezing cold, James. He says, no, it can't be. That's $1,000 suit, mate. And I'm thinking, well, you want your fucking money back because it's shit. So I was frozen during that. And the water was crystal clear. It's just, I think because of the angle and because of the leaves floating around on it, it looks really unpleasant.
Yeah.
No, but it was, you know, I got plenty in my mouth and it tasted fine. It's just, I love James. He's a very interesting director. He also directed Feel the Misery. And again, he had me in the sea doing weird and wonderful things. He's a great director. We'll probably use him again in the future. Although when I sent him the lyrics, he did go to town somewhat on the visuals, because I gave him an idea of what I thought the video might look like, and he kind of threw that out the window and said, no, we're doing it my way. And I thought, fucking, here we go again. He did the same thing on Feel the Misery, and that's fine. I kind of like that because I'm in the band looking out, so I'm unaware of how our music sounds to someone who hasn't created it. I created it, so I don't know what it looks like to an outer person. It's like Metallica can't enjoy Metallica. They'll never enjoy Master of Puppets because they wrote it. They don't see it like we see it. And so I thought, okay, James isn't in the band, so he's looking at this song from a completely different angle. Despite me giving him the lyrics, he's seeing something else, and I like that. And so I said, look, you tell us where to stand. I was not expecting to be blacked up and thrown in a river, but it happened, and I think it came out quite nice, actually. I quite like it.
The visuals of the video are absolutely phenomenal. Just phenomenal. Amazing job. It really brings the song to life.
Yeah, he's done a really good job. Yeah, the visuals are amazing. We were lucky. We somehow, I don't know how, someone pulled some strings, but we ended up with a £40,000 camera, which is, it's like 60,000 American dollars, probably 100,000 Canadian dollars. Really top of the range camera for 2 days. And on the second day, the first day was in an old church hall, and that was fine. But the second day, it rained all day long, all over this expensive camera. And it was just, I'm amazed it managed to fulfill its purpose. But it was a nightmare shoot, to be honest, because it was in a very steep valley like this with the river at the bottom. But we had to get from the top down there, and we were slipping and sliding and dropping lights and generators, and it was like some Vietnam film. It was absolute nightmare. We were covered in shit and cuts and bruises, and we ended up shooting till 3:30 in the morning, soaking wet everybody. And but it is what it is. That's our art. That's what we do.
Yeah. One last question for you. As the album now is out, and now we have this virus to deal with, really affects how musicians promote their music and get out there, because it looks like festival season this year is pretty much canceled. And even tours, we don't know even when tours will be able to happen at any time soon, with borders being closed and everything like that. What are you guys have in mind in order to promote the album and get the music to the fans? Are you guys thinking of doing any streams or any playthroughs, anything like that whatsoever?
We are trying to come up with something to help relieve the boredom for a lot of people. It's difficult to perform the album because we can't really rehearse. And I know some bands are trying to work out live gigs somehow over the internet. I'm not sure how that works. I'm not that very technical, so I don't understand how it works. We're not doing that, but we might do just some question and answer sessions. I was considering reading some of my older lyrics and explaining to people the meaning behind some of them, just little snippets, and maybe reading some poetry and things like that. I think we were lucky when we released the album. The virus hadn't gripped the Western world with such a stranglehold as it does now, which meant people were still able to go to the stores to buy copies of, on vinyl and CD. So we just escaped with that. And I've basically been promoting this album since January, and I'm still doing it now, and enjoying it, actually, really enjoying it, because sometimes people who interview you bring you something you weren't expecting, and it makes it less of an interview, more of a conversation, very much like we're having now. And I think that's important. The previous interview I did was very much, you could tell they were reading off a piece of paper and they hadn't a clue who I was. And that's fine. It is what it is. But yeah, it's difficult to do things at this moment, promotional wise. Skype's great for this sort of thing. The interview schedule hasn't slowed down, apart from when we missed each other recently. It's interview after interview after interview. That never seems to stop. We've got another EP coming out at later on in the year. There's no actual release date yet. I don't know if the virus is going to alter that. I don't see why it would. Because when we recorded the album, we recorded 11 songs. Nuclear Blast picked 8 for the album and the other 3 for the EP. So the EP has the same production values and quality as the album does, and that's called Macabre Cabaret. and the artwork's done, and it's almost delivered. You know, the record label can pretty much release it when they want. So that's something to look forward to. Yeah, we've cancelled gigs. Well, we haven't cancelled, and they've been taken away from us by the virus. And you know what? That's not going to affect us greatly. We haven't played live for 3.5 years. So we were going to come back this year with maybe 5 or 6 summer festivals, ease ourselves back into it. And now those have gone. There's talk of us playing in Greece, in Athens, in November. That might still happen. You never know. Things could be a bit better. But the summer festivals, they're not going to happen. Even some that are still confirmed, they're not going to happen. Because the work to set up a festival starts now, because of all the logistics of setting up a festival isn't something you do in 2 weeks. It's months and months in advance. So a festival in August is being organised now. And because no one's doing that, those festivals are just not going to happen. It will affect bands who tour a lot. With our great friends Paradise Lost, they play a lot of live shows. This is going to really affect bands like that. They're going to be crawling the walls at home because they're not used to spending that much time at home.
And they also have a new album coming out in
So again, promotion is going to be emails. Well, it's going to be digital promotion. That's all it's going to be. There's no, in the old days, we would fly out to Europe and meet all these people and do 50 interviews a day in different countries. You know, that's not going to happen at the moment. But you can still do it. You can still do promotion. That won't stop. But yeah, those kind of bands are going to be losing a lot of money, and they're the ones going stir crazy. You know, we haven't been on stage for 3.5 years. We're not that bothered. You know?
So 1 more year is not going to kill you.
No, exactly. It's just we do feel for our brothers and sisters out there who do 150, 200 shows a year. They don't know what to do with themselves, and they're losing money. That's their income. For us, gigging is not our income. So we're not actually missing anything at all, but we feel for our brothers and sisters. They've got it difficult now.
Well, I think you hit on something that's very important. The fact that your album came out and people are still promoting it and you're still doing interviews at this point in time in the year, I think it speaks volumes to the quality of the record that you guys released.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that, but I guess that kind of makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, if the album had been an absolute flop, nobody would want to talk about it, and nobody would be hitting you up for interviews, right? So the fact that it's you have to look at it like it's such an interesting album that people are willing to talk about it, and it's not it's almost becomes timeless. It's not an album that's stuck into a time period that if you don't talk about it within the month of release, it kind of loses interest. To me, this album is going to be an album that's going to be just as important today as it is tomorrow, as it is a month from now, 2 months from now. I could talk to you in November about this album. It would still sound fresh to me. And I'm sure it would sound fresh to those listening.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate that because we as I say, we're on the inside looking out. We can't judge the feeling for an album while we're creating it. We sort of have an idea what it's going to sound like, but you don't, until it's actually out, you've no idea what the general feel is. You don't know if it's going to hark back to a previous time. Some people have been saying it sort of reminds them a bit of the not like Gods of the Sun, but a line of Deathless Kings kind of era, My Dying Bride. I can't see that at all. Again, because I've got blinkers on. I'm seeing it completely different to other people. So it's nice that people like you say the words that you do, because it makes me feel like all that hard work in that studio really paid off. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I've talked to a bunch of musicians, and sometimes when you release a great album, one of the questions that I ask is, when you were finished in the studio, did you know that this was going to be like one of those mic drops? Okay, this album is amazing. And you just walk out like feeling like you just released the greatest album ever. And more often than not, I get the answer that you just gave me. It's just we're so absorbed in creating the album that we don't really see what it is for what it is, because we're the ones making it. So it's always a really interesting perspective, because as fans, we think that you guys see what we're seeing, or you guys hear what we're hearing.
No, it's nothing like that. And my final day in the studio was, thank fuck that's over. That was my final day in the studio. But yeah, you're right. It's because I mentioned Metallica again. Master of Puppets is one of my all-time favorite albums. And when I listen to it, it's not just the music, it's not just the production. That was my introduction to Metallica. When that album came out, that was the first I heard it. I missed the first two albums. That was my introduction to Metallica. And in those formative years, that left a mark that will never go away. So for me, that will always be their greatest album. And they can never enjoy it like I can. But I'm sure they have their own favourite albums. But it's, people who have been in some of the most amazing films of all time can't appreciate them because they were in front of the camera and we worship them and they just think, thanks.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, Aaron, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to reconnect after a few failed attempts. One of them due to me not knowing the time zones, but that's not important. That's not.
No, it's good. I knew we'd get there in the end. I've got a list as long as my arm for interviews, and anything that I've missed out just drops down to the bottom, and we'll catch up with it eventually. So.
Yeah. And I'm glad we were able to catch up, and I'm glad that you were able to find time for me because I felt like a total idiot that I messed up the time zones.
No, I am guilty of doing similar things myself, so it's not a problem.
Well, thank you very much for your time. All the best for you, your family, for the band, and I hope I see you guys on the road in 2021.
Yeah, we should be there. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Take care.